It was early July when I first saw the path. It was a dark point in a ring of feather bells, and it had a pole to it, an empty wanting, sitting in the tree line. I grew up in a pretty rural part of southern Missouri, in a house in the Ozarks. It was a beautiful place, and a beautiful childhood. Dad bought the land empty and built the house himself as a distraction from drinking. Mom put her foot down shortly after I was born, and Dad knew that she was right. So we bought the land, and instead of going out after work, he'd go to the land and work on the house, giving himself a choice between drinking himself to death or building his dream house worked like a charm, and he'd been 15 years sober when he died. It hit me hard, but now I can see how lucky I was. I had him long enough to learn all about how to live near and with the land. He taught me carpentry, hunting, fishing, and all kinds of things that lots of girls rarely get a chance to learn. In the spring and fall, he'd always take a week and go out into the woods and just live there. All three of us would. We'd bring about half enough food and try to make up for the rest ourselves. Depending on the season, there were mushrooms, berries, cattails, pawpaws to collect. Dad could always sniff out a good fishing hole, too. Mom was a great camp cook. She'd usually sneak a few things from the garden into her pack. Onions and garlic scrapes, peppers, and the like. It's kinds of things that make whatever it is you're cooking smell and taste good. Dad and I would bring back fish. Mom would throw some butter in the pan, and next thing you know, the forest would smell like caramelizing peppers and garlic. We never saw her pack the good stuff, never saw her chop it, and it would just suddenly be there. We always kind of suspected witchcraft. We'd settle in with full bellies, and Dad would tell stories about strange sounds in the woods, weeping and moaning, monsters crashing through the underbrush, missing people, and the occasional scrapes left on car doors. The good stuff, I'd say. I'd get good and scared and snuggle in between them while I was still young enough to do so. I miss my dad, but it's easy to see him in all the things I do and love. There was a couple, Reggie and Laura, who lived not far away. We were neighbors, but we had 15 acres, and they had 25, so you usually had to put effort into seeing them. When Dad died, Richie took me out in the woods and showed me the most magical place I'd ever seen. It was a clearing less than a mile from our house, but it was surrounded by some pretty intimidating-looking hollers, so if you didn't know where the pass was, you'd never find it. Reggie knew where the pass was, and after that, so did I. The sun would shine in like a ray of gold, and there was a single flat boulder in the middle that you could use as a seat or a table. In the early summer, it would fill up with pink and purple spring cress, and the tree line would be ringed with toothwort flowers, all nodding and mournful. The real show came later in the summer, around July, when the feather bells would light up the tree line like a wildfire. They grow like long grasses, with a line of bright red flowers licking at the air all along the tops of them. I'd sprawl out over the boulder, feel the warmth of the sun, surrounded by those fiery extravagances of feather bells, and soak it all in. I could feel the energy of the place coursing through me. It felt connected, honest, true. It was a place of great solace for me. I'd hack out along the creek and collect some of the wisteria, then head to the pass and spend the rest of the day weaving them into baskets on my shoulder. Still soaking up the energy of the forest, Mom would occasionally come out to check on me, bring me sandwiches and the like. "This is a place of longing," she said once. "It was longing that drew your dad here in the first place. It's part of the ecosystem here." I gave her that look that teenagers give their mom when she doesn't really get it and wants to be left alone. All I'm saying is, don't get lost in it. That longing will eat you alive if you let it. If it starts getting to you, just head back to the house. I'll make a nice pie for you. "I love you, sweetheart." She gave me a big hug when she said it. Once I had a good-sized basket, I went into the woods and filled it with all of Dad's favorite things, and buried it there with me. It took me all summer, but by the time I was through, I felt more connected to my dad and to the forest than I ever had. During my senior year, Laura died of cancer. I brought Reggie out to the clearing with some wisteria and a pack of food. I told him about the basket I made when Dad died, and that I'd stay out here for as long as he needed it. He was thankful. It was the last time I saw him. Mom figured he just couldn't handle being reminded of Laura and moved away. But there were rumors that he went out to the forest and just never came back. There were a couple of good years where I was always a little nervous that I'd find what was left of him during a hike. That faded with time, and I accepted that Mom was probably right. She usually was. I got a job doing carpentry after graduation and got an apartment in town. I loved my newfound freedom, being able to have boys over whenever I wanted, cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted. Every weekend I'd go back to the house, back to my clearing. I'd get to feeling weird and itchy if I was gone for too long, like something wasn't right. There's a disconnect that happens when you live around people, like you start to forget what's real. You start thinking that social reality is reality, that rumors and gossip and bullying and politics are real. But you can't put any of those things in your belly or rub it between your fingers to get the scent of it. Real is a rock in a clearing where I can eat pawpaws and smell the autumn leaves quickly on the way back to the soil. Real is the electric crackling of the leaves raining down and the fiery blossoms of the feather bells. All that other stuff, that's just people trying to get you to do things they want. I was 24 and sitting on the boulder reading a book when I first noticed the hollow place in the tree line. First I thought maybe a deer had come through and taken out the flowers in that area, but I just couldn't ignore it. Something about it just felt not good, but still welcoming. I could feel a wanting in my chest, a pull of uncertainty. I looked all around the path for signs of what made it. There were no tracks, no footprints, nothing, just an opening. It was damp and dark, like the bottom of a holler. The trees leaned over it and filled in the canopy so much that you couldn't see more than 10 feet down the path. It just dissolved into nothingness. The scent of decaying leaves came out of it. Being where it was at the time of the year, it should have been drying out and smelling of greenery. This smelled like autumn rain, toads, night crawlers. It felt like the wrong home. Like when your neighbor is moving and you get a peek at their apartment and it's just like yours, but it's just empty and wrong. The path was empty and wrong too, and I wanted it, and it frightened me. I must have spent an hour or more scouting around the path. I'd dig through the forest on either side of it until I hit the edge of the holler, then go back. I'd toss rocks and sticks into the darkness and watch them dissolve away. I turned on my phone's flashlight and held my arm out as far as I could, but I saw nothing. The sun started to dip, and I resolved to come back another day. I was back the next weekend. The path sat there staring at me. I had almost forgotten about it, but there it was, and I was filled with a hollow wanting. I sat my phone and collection of weaving materials on the boulder and approached the opening. Nothing. Just a big open maw. I could hear the silence seeping out of that place. I just stood there, staring, wondering, wanting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved into the path to fill the nothingness. It was dark. I mean, more than it should have been. At 20 feet in, I could no longer see the tops of the trees, the start of the path, or where it led to. I expected to run into the holler that surrounded the place in no time, but I just kind of kept on moving. The holler never showed up. The quiet of the place put me on my nerves. Forests have a life of their own. The breath of the wind and wings flowing through the trees, the pulse of insects and wildlife pushing through the underbrush. A real vitality. That was muted here, like when you're wearing a good pair of headphones with the sound off. It's all just turned down and filled with cotton. Cotton, darkness, and the smell of night crawlers. I turned the corner and found the biggest patch of jack-o'-lantern mushrooms I'd ever seen. It was beautiful, easily 3 feet in diameter, and crawling a foot up the side of an old stump. At night, I bet you could see them glow from 100 feet away. I stepped over carefully to check them out. You can't eat them, but let me tell you, they're a sight to behold. I wanted to behold some sights at that point. It seemed like a little fairy city. Stems led to caps, next to more stems, thick enough you couldn't see anything past them. I moved all around them, just taking it in from all sides, when something caught my eye on the forest floor. Something smooth and regular in a sea of irregularity. Man-made things stick out here. I got down and dug at the forest floor a bit and pulled out a watch. It was a nice one by the look of it. Looked like it had been there for a while. I brushed the dirt off and saw the inscription on the back. For Reggie, my beloved. My heart sank. Jack-o'-lanterns grow on trees, not people, so I wasn't worried that I'd find him, but finding his watch way out here wasn't a good sign. I felt a pang of guilt. I pocketed the watch and moved back to the path, thinking I should go let someone know. There's plenty of time to explore here later. I was filled with a deep longing, a hollowed-out desire, and I stood there, fumbling with the watch in my pocket, lost in it all. The darkness, the dampness, and the bright orange of the mushrooms. I remember my dad, Laura, Reggie, my mom, all the people who made me who I am. Reality came back in a huge crash from behind me, like a wave of trees falling in my direction. Something massive was in the woods, smashing aggressively up the trail I had just come down. I took off running the other way. Whatever it was, I wanted some distance between us. I got a couple of 100 feet down the trail and stopped. I didn't like the idea of trying to hide in a part of the forest that was new to me. Maybe I avoided the animals, but I didn't want to do so at the cost of getting lost. I stood still, leaned against a tree, and just listened. We don't get big animals here. Deer are by far the biggest, but that's it. And I know that a deer running through the forest sounds different than that. There's been some talk of buffalo, bear, mountain lions coming back to the area, but nobody has seen any of them around here. I had no idea what that could have been, but I wanted to go back home. Dad would have known. He'll tell me what it was and how to handle it, calm me down, and get me home. I caught a flash of movement at the edge of my vision, just a bit too far into the darkness to see. It sounded big, but it was moving slow now. I felt the gnawing at my chest, a pulling, wanting, that hollow desire. I sat quiet and listened to it, trying to figure out what it was, where it was coming from, where it was going. Waiting and listening for my chance to get past it, to get home. More movement, a quiet rustle in the underbrush. A shape came out of the darkness, dark and thin, wobbling slowly down the path. It coalesced into a definitive shape of a man, thin and gaunt and filthy. It was Reggie. He had been out here all these years, his hair and beard grown out in a brittle frizz. "Reggie!" I shouted. "Oh, Amy, what are you doing here? Why are you here? I'm so sorry. You can't be here. It's not safe." "What are you talking about? I've been out here my whole life. Where have you been? We need to get back. You don't look well. What have you been eating and drinking?" I can't, he said. I can't go back. I belong to it now. I can't go home." "What do you mean? That thing in the woods? It's probably just a really big deer, and probably more afraid of us than we are of it." I was channeling my dad perfectly. He was so good in situations like this. It's not an animal, Amy. It's not anything you may have known about. I feel it. I feel it inside me. I feel it clawing at me. I can't let you end up like me. You gotta leave," he said. I'm not leaving without you. You're unwell." I grabbed his arm and started pulling him down the path, back towards home. That's when I felt it. The hollow wanting, the need, it stopped me in my tracks. Reggie twisted out of my grip and pushed me away, whispering in earnest, You have to go now." I stumbled forward into the darkness with a crash resounding behind me, coming on quickly. I slipped behind a rock to hide, poking my head out to see Reggie disappear down the path into the darkness, holding his hands up and calling, I'm here! I'm here!" The crashing slowed just on the edge of the darkness that I could see. Its body looked like a tube of smooth mottled skin, a snake without scales, twice the thickness of the biggest tree I'd ever seen. It undulated through the air, belly barely scraping the top of the soil. Then a shoulder emerged, and a hand reached out of the darkness, grasping at the air. Dirt and grime mixed with a shiny ooze, getting squeezed and mixed together in the cracks of its knuckles. Thick mud caked the underside of its fingernails. The hand searched around in the air before landing on the ground and pushing the body forward and around the back into the darkness. Shortly after, another arm emerged from that blackness, repeating the process. Then a thick tail whipped out and around, smashing into a tree along the way. The longing raged inside me as Reggie led it back into the darkness. I ran, and I kept running through the leaves and the branches until I couldn't run anymore. I found a good tree, and I leaned against it out of view. I could still hear the thing shambling around behind me, slow and aimless now. Reggie must have distracted it. I sank down to the ground to catch my breath. It had definitely not been a deer. I sat there for a few minutes, letting my heart slow down, waiting for a calm so I could think this thing through. I can't keep going in this direction. I could probably just run a straight line back. The path wasn't terribly twisty, or if I could find a holler, I could probably follow it back around to the clearing. If that thing sticks to the path, that might be the safest route. Slower, but safer. That only works if it's the same holler. I could end up just getting lost, which would probably be worse. Straight back is probably safer. If I ran as fast as I could probably be in the clear pretty fast. A dull throbbing started up my feet. They pulsed, hot from running. I shifted back and forth a bit to let them calm down, and the ground shifted back. I looked down, and there were night crawlers everywhere, gnawing at the trees and leaves and wrapping around my shoes. All was moving back up the path. Then I felt it too, the deep, gnawing desire. I could feel it in my heart. I felt it, a wanting, a longing. I knew what was coming, but I needed to look anyway. My eyes followed the trail of night crawlers back up the path. The head of the thing emerged from the darkness, broad and flat, pushed forward by enormous muscular arms. With every step, its hands reached out, grasping the air. My heart filled with need and want, an emptiness crying out, a desire ringed with crackled burnt edges. Reggie laid in its mouth, legs dangling from side to side, arms and head from the other. Long strings of saliva dripped around him, mixing with the mud and calling to the night crawlers. He turned his head, and I caught his eye. Sadness washed over him, and he whispered, "Run!" I did. I ran right past them both. The wanting burned at my skin and hollowed me out as I passed inches away. Every part of me sang the aberration of giving in, and I have never wanted more. But my feet kept going, and in time, so did I. With the creature behind me, I kept crashing down the path, my every nerve lit up with that hollow need. I crashed out to the clearing, over the pass, and back to the yard where Mom was waiting. A fresh pie, just out of the oven. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And, of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.